Social Inequality. Thursday, May 14, 2020. 8:28 p.m. Social Inequality.
Overview of social inequality. The resources in a society are unevenly distributed. Wealth in U.S., top 20% have 72% of the wealth of the country, and bottom 20% only control 3%. Upper, middle, and lower class. Based on incomes. As you go up the social ladder, have better access to education, healthcare, and housing. Groups of population disproportionately affected ethnic/racial minorities have greater degrees of inequality as manifested by lower incomes, lower education, and reduced access to healthcare. Those in poverty also face considerable barriers to obtaining the same healthcare, education, and other resources as others. Gender does too. Females experience differences in pay, gender pay gap, and the glass ceiling effect, poorly represented in higher position in companies. People may feel increasingly socially excluded, live in segregated neighborhoods, and feel politically disempowered. Can lead to civil unrest and tempt people into criminal activities. Ways to help: government schemes, food stamps, improve access to education/healthcare, and figure out social interventions that allow integration to society. Upward and downward mobility. We have a number of ways to break down society into social layers, classes. Lower class manual work, labor, low-pay jobs. Middle class professionals, better paying jobs. Upper class very wealthy businessmen and family wealth. Correlates to amount of income. When we think of social positions, can there be movement? Yes. Various ways. Individual can move horizontally, move within the same class. Accountant switches job to different accounting company. Vertical movement, move up or down the social hierarchy. Manager at restaurant becomes CEO of fast food restaurant. But if he gets demoted to serving food, fall downwards. Various types of social constructs that allow for social mobility. Caste system, very little social mobility, because your role is determined entirely by background you're born to and who you're married to. A lot of social stability. The Hindu caste system. Class system allows for degree of social mobility, combination of background and movement, often by education. Less stability. Meritocracy concept that people achieve social positions solely based on ability and achievements. Highly idealized. Birth/parental background doesn't matter. Extreme social mobility. Equal opportunity. Intergenerational and intragenerational mobility, social mobility. If change in social class happens in a person's own lifetime, intergenerational mobility. Intergenerational mobility, change in social class between generations. Parent is working class and son is working class. Absolute and relative poverty. Two different ways of thinking about poverty. Does it threaten survival of person, or does it exclude them from society? Absolute poverty, an absolute level at which if you go below, survival is threatened. Minimum level of resources a human being needs to survive. This level no matter where you are. Approximate, $1 to $2 a day, talking about developing countries. However, someone in Arctic needs a lot more than somewhere else. There's variability absolute poverty does not consider. The median level of income in a society can gradually rise as country gets richer. When it does, we find less people live in absolute poverty, decrease in poverty. Relative poverty in developed countries, use a different marker, a percent level below the median income of the country. In US, instead of $1 to $2 a day, median income is above $80 per day. Less than 60% of the median income. If a country's income rises up, absolute poverty line won't change, median income level would. Relative poverty is not about survival, it's people whose incomes are so low in their own society they're being excluded from society. Social reproduction. Huge amount of social inequality between rich families and poor families. Large social inequality seems to replicate itself across generations. Perpetuation of inequality through social institutions, such as education/economy, social mobility counters this. Social reproduction transmission of social inequality from one generation to the next. X. People with rich parents end up wealthy themselves. Poor families give birth to kids in poor neighborhoods, with less access to education and opportunities, and they grow up to be poor also. They have financial capital, and can invest it to obtain social capital, building up reliable, useful social networks. Connections can also expose you to cultural capital, knowledge, education, and skills transmitted across generations. X. If parents exposing you to trips abroad and learning foreign languages or cultural items of social inequalities from one generation to the next. Doesn't educational system allow poor people to gain capital too? Our educational system doesn't value cultures of low classes. It doesn't value the culture and social networks of the poor population. Education system can reinforce this social stratification. Social exclusion. Being an integral member of society has lots of advantages: access to good social networks, housing, educational resources, and resources in community. But certain individuals can be excluded to the peripheries of society, and are prevented from participating in society. Reduced right and access to resources/opportunities. Some can drag people into the periphery of society. The poverty magnet can drag people away from the core part of society, and experience a greater degree of social exclusion. The ill-health magnet can also drag people away, can't participate in society. Certain groups may face discrimination, based on their race/gender/sexual orientation/etc. The discrimination magnet. Education, housing, employment, all important factors. With lack of any of these, they can be relegated to fringes. People in periphery often have many of these magnets combined, have tremendous forces pushing them away. They may also have greater consequences like ill health and criminal activities. Segregation is a way of separating out groups of people and giving them access to a separate set of resources within the same society. Idea separate but equal, which is rarely true in practice. Segregated people often have worse resources. Segregation is maintained by law/public institutions, or more informal processes like hidden discrimination. Social isolation, when community voluntarily isolates itself from mainstream, based on their own religious/cultural/other beliefs. Environmental justice. Where we live plays a huge role in environmental benefits and risks we are exposed to. Areas with high poverty and lots of racial minorities often have few environmental benefits: green spaces, parks, recreation. They also get a lot of environmental burden compared to wealthier parts. Includes waste facilities, manufacturing/factories, energy production, airports. At risk because they often have few alternatives, little awareness of risks they face, and other pressing issues. More health problems like asthma, obesity, etc. Wealthier population society has much higher benefits. More politically and economically powerful, and able to demand beneficial facilities are placed close to them and burdening facilities far away. Also better represented in environmental/lobbying groups. Big concept is environmental justice, looks at the fair distribution of the environmental benefits and burdens within society across all groups. Residential segregation. Residential segregation, groups of people separate into different neighborhoods. Can mean race or income. Where we live affects our life chances, because it affects our politics, healthcare, availability to education, etc. Other forms of segregation. 1. Concentration, there's clustering of different groups. 2. Centralization, segregation plus clustering in a central area. Index of dissimilarity 0 is total segregation, and 100 perfect distribution. Why is residential segregation important? Political isolation, communities segregated are politically weak because their political interests don't overlap with other communities, become political vulnerable, don't have the political influence to keep their own needs addressed. Linguistic isolation, communities who are isolated may develop own language, even in same city. May limit jobs. Lower access to quality education/health. Spatial mismatch opportunities for low-income people in segregated communities may be present but farther away, and harder to access. Gap between where people live and where opportunities are. Global inequality. The world is extremely unequal. Life expectancy is Congo is 51 versus France/Japan is 84. Tremendous range. Access to clean water in Africa, very difficult. In US/Europe, very easy. Champagne glass can help explain inequalities in wealth we see. It represents the distribution of wealth. Top 1 to 5th have 82.7% of the global income. Poorest 1 to 5th have 1.4% of global income. Richest 85 people in world have more wealth than the poorest 3.5 billion people in the world. Inequalities in individual countries as well. Very poor countries can have a few extremely rich people. Maternal mortality rate is a marker for healthcare systems. In NA and Europe 10 to 20 people per 100,000 die of childbirth. In SA 75/100,000. SE Asia 170/100,000. Central Africa 700+/100,000. Health and healthcare disparities in the U.S. A lot of disparities we see in U.S. are result of poor economic and environmental conditions. Social economic status is a pyramid. As we go up social pyramid, access and quality of healthcare improves. Opposite is true for those at bottom of pyramid: more disease, less high-quality healthcare, substandard housing, poor diet, dangerous jobs, can't afford expensive treatments. Race can play a role. Hispanics and African Americans have higher morbidity and mortality rates, worse access to healthcare, and lower quality healthcare. Even though some can be attributed to SES reasons, doesn't explain everything. Minorities less likely to receive everyday healthcare and treatments for life-threatening conditions. Gender differences: men typically use fewer preventative services like vaccines/checkups. Women require reproductive services, and access is reduced due to local laws. Studies for treatments for diabetes/heart disease don't always include women, and can suffer from lack of research. LGBT community might face discrimination, which can limit clinics they feel comfortable seeking help from. Transgender especially face discrimination, and have a hard time finding someone who has experience working with transgender individuals. Leads them to be reluctant to seek services when they really need them. Intersectionality: discrimination based on multiple factors. Many types of discrimination, like sex/gender/culture/race, but what if someone experiences multiple forms at same time? Female who is African American and practices Buddhist teachings, causing her to be discriminated against in 3 different areas. Social stratification: groups of people are given better preferences than others. Group-based intersectionality is at the individual/person level. Why is it important to consider intersection? Because multiple different categories of potential discrimination/oppression that compounds in one individual and put her at disadvantage in society. Theory of intersectionality asks us to consider all the different levels of discrimination. Originally coined in 1989 by Crenshaw as a feminist theory, but has since expanded out and use it to explain oppression in all parts of society. Class consciousness and false consciousness. Means of production: way we produce goods, factories and farms. Owned by fairly wealthy individuals, which hire a large amount of workers which offer their labor, without owning any of the means of production. There's a class divide, a hierarchy of upper/lower class. Theory by Karl Marx: workers in working class don't realize they're being exploited and oppressed by this capitalistic model of working. Workers can develop class consciousness and realize they have solidarity with one another and struggle to overcome this oppression and exploitation. Involves seizing and obtaining means and redistributing the means of production among the workers. False consciousness, unlike class consciousness, instead of seeing they have solidarity with one another, they're unable to see their oppression. And owners can promote this false consciousness by controlling classes, making it more difficult for workers to see their oppression. Statistics. Regression. All variables examined are continuous. Linear regression. Degree of dependence between one variable and another. Data is on scatter plot, one-way influence of one variable on another. Correlation. All variables examined are continuous. Unlike regression, makes no assumptions about which variable is influencing the other. If correlation coefficient is 1, perfect. If -1, opposite. 0, random. Chi-square. When all variables are categorical, looks at if two distributions of categorical data differ from each other. Null hypothesis versus alternative hypothesis. T-test compares mean values of a continuous variable dependent between two categories/groups, X comparing mean of a group to a specific value. Can also compare means of two groups. Two-tailed equals possibility of relationship in both directions, one-tailed equals one direction. ANOVA. Similar to t-test, compare distributions of continuous variable between groups of categorical variable, but can be used for 3+ groups. If value doubles, 100% increase. Study types. Cross-sectional study. Look at a group of different people at one moment in time. Cohort study. Following a subset of population over a lifetime. A cohort is a group of people who share a common characteristic, X people born and exposed to same pollutant/drug/ etc., in period of time. Longitudinal study. Data is gathered for the same subjects repeatedly over a period of time, can take years or decades. Case control study. Observational study where two groups differing in outcome are identified and compared to find a causal factor. X comparing people with the disease with those who don't but are otherwise similar. Clinical trial. Highly controlled interventional studies. Randomized controlled trial. People studied randomly given one of treatments under study, used to test efficacy/side effects of medical interventions like drugs. Gold standard for a clinical trial. Validity. Internal validity. Extent to which a causal conclusion based on a study is warranted. Confounding factors often impact the internal validity of an experiment. External validity. Whether results of the study can be generalized to other situations and other people. To protect external validity, sample must be completely random, and all situational variables must be tightly controlled. Construct validity. Whether a tool is measuring what it is intended to measure. Regression to the mean. If first measurement is extreme, second measurement will be closer to the mean. Confounding variables. Changes in dependent variable may be due to existence of or variations in a third variable. Temporal confounds. Time-related confounding variables. Types of control. Vehicular control. What experimental group does without the directly desired impact. Positive control. Treatment with known response. Negative control group with no response expected.